So literally just wrapped up watching the Canes drop Game 5 at home to Florida, who advanced to their third straight Stanley Cup. It's almost midnight now, but I wanted to get this out while this is still fresh on my mind and the series just being wrapped up. So rewinding back a couple of days, I was at game two of this series and it sucked. It sucked watching the Canes not able to get anything going on their home ice for 60 minutes, dropping that game 5-0, and Florida just completely dominating after winning game one on the road in Carolina. Then game three rolls around. Canes Panthers enter the third period tied 1-1. Both teams looking pretty solid, and then everything falls apart. The wheels completely fall off for the Canes. They get demolished in the third period, go down 3-0. And at this point, I was pretty blown. It looked like I was pretty certain the Canes were going to get swept for the fourth straight time in the ECF and going 0-16 in the Eastern Conference Finals, going all the way back to 2009. But you know what? They showed up in game four. They finally established their style of hockey. They came and fought and they won in a shutout on the road 3-0. The defensemen played a phenomenal game in that series after being super ridiculed and just not playing their best hockey throughout those first three games up until that point. And then tonight, game five, back in Raleigh. First period, Canes go up 2-0. Sebastian Aho finally shows up in this series, the Canes' best player outside of Jacob Slavin. But then second period rolls around, Panthers completely take over, take the lead, score 3 goals really fast. And then you get into the third period where the Canes did respond, tied up the game, but then you had the Panthers with Verhaeghe again, what ended up being the game-winning goal. So when the Canes were down 0-3 in this series, I was extremely disappointed. And it wasn't because we were going to lose the series. I always knew that the Canes' ceiling entering these playoffs was the Eastern Conference Finals. You can watch my Stanley Cup predictions video from a month ago or however long ago that was. And I said the Canes would make the Eastern Conference Finals, but I did say they would ultimately lose to the Panthers or Lightning, whichever team made it out of that side of the East. I was a pretty big proponent of whichever team wins that Battle of Florida would win the East, and ultimately it is the Panthers making it out the East. So I know the Canes. I mean, going back to what I was saying, the reason I was actually extremely disappointed being down 0-3 was just the fact that we played so well leading up to this series, going 8-2, knocking out the number one seed in the East, taking care of business against a injured Devils team, and I could not believe we were going to be swept again. If you're a Canes fan watching this, you were tired of the memes to that point. You couldn't believe seeing the style of hockey we were playing, how everything was working. Freddie was playing his best hockey. Andrei Svechnikov was showing up. Everything was going our way, and then we were literally on the verge of being swept again. I just wanted that label of us not being able to win in the Eastern Conference Finals to be gone, and I wanted us to go out swinging against the defending Stanley Cup champs. And I know the series was lost in 5 games by the Carolina Hurricanes, but in these final 2 games, the Canes went out swinging, playing their style of hockey. So the truth is, this team you see on your screen right here was never going to win a Stanley Cup. I know the players and coaches in the locker room don't feel that way, but I never thought this team was a Stanley Cup team going into this year. The Canes last offseason lost a third of their roster, and a lot of those guys were key to the identity of this team on the defense and the offense. The team going to the playoffs last year felt like it was the team. Even Sebastian Aho last year, when they were knocked out in the playoffs by the Rangers in the second round, said that the guys in the locker room thought that was the year with that team, with getting Jake Gensel and Kuznetsov at the trade deadline, and just all the pieces falling in play. That team felt like a cup or bust team. And then this last offseason, we kind of lost most of that team. And we entered this year with really lowered expectations. I think everyone who watches hockey had way more realistic expectations for this Canes team, including Canes fans. And so called experts even said the Canes would not make the playoffs. Not all of them, but there was a lot of experts out there saying the Canes would miss the playoffs this year with this new team. And boy, were they wrong. But with all that being said, This team under Rod Brindamore this year definitely overachieved in my eyes, and I think a lot of people, once the emotions fade away with the series just ending tonight, will agree that this team overachieved under Rod Brindamore. This was the furthest a Canes team under Rod Brindamore has gone in the playoffs, and this is arguably their weakest roster in the last 3 or 4 years. The first team in 2019 that made the Eastern Conference Finals and got swept by the Bruins, that roster was just, I mean, a lot of those players were like young and coming up. It was Andrei Svechnikov's rookie year. Sebastian Aho was still a young player. We had vets who aren't on this team anymore, and a lot's changed since then. But this team you're looking at is also really young right now, and we don't have the firepower that the Canes had in the last 2 or 3 years. So, looking at this team, just want to recap kind of what we saw in the playoffs with who we had on this roster. So, you had a first line. Obviously, these lines changed a lot throughout the playoffs, but kind of just going off what I think made the most sense throughout the playoffs, what worked, and what we saw in the regular season and in the postseason. So, first of all, we'll talk about Rod Brindamore. There's going to be a couple people saying, oh, out of them, just talking out their ass, basically, based on emotion, like Rod Brindamore needs to be fired. This is a fourth straight Eastern Conference final where we couldn't get it done, couldn't make it to the finals. But I don't agree at all. I think you can do a lot worse than Rod Brindamore as your head coach. This team's identity is Rod Brindamore. The style of hockey we play is all through Rod Brindamore. The defense we bring on any given night, the pucks on net approach we take, who some people call boring, but in reality, it does win games. It's unfortunate that we're playing such a strong team, the Florida Panthers, where they play the Hurricane style of hockey, but they play on a whole nother level with the whole way. Their roster is just top to bottom deeper than the Canes. It's a better roster. It's a better top six, and no one calls their style of hockey boring, even though it's the most similar to the Kane style of hockey, essentially. But Rod Brindamore overachieved with this roster he was given this year, and firing him makes no sense given he was just given an extension last year. And now we'll look at the offense. So just touching on the first line, these are our best players in Sebastian Aho, Andrei Svechnikov, Seth Jarvis. Andrei Svechnikov was not that impressive this regular season, but in these playoffs, he showed up big time, and I was really impressed by his play. We needed that out of him if we wanted any shot of winning games in this postseason, and he did show up, especially in those first 2 rounds. Sebastian Aho played really good hockey in these playoffs. In the Panthers series, in the first 3 games, I didn't like a lot of what I saw out of him because he was passing the puck on a lot of breakaway opportunities to passes that were set up for failure when I would have liked him to shoot. I felt like he lost some of his confidence there in games 1, 2, and 3, but in a lot of game 4. But tonight in Raleigh in game 5, he did show up, and at the end of game 3, I think that empty net goal Svechnikov gifted Aho was a huge confidence booster. But I'm going to take a stance that I've had for a while. Sebastian Aho is a star player, and he is our best player offensively. But to bring the best out of Sebastian Aho as our first-line center, the Canes need to pair him with a superstar forward or a guy who can go out there and get goals when it's needed. I think Sebastian Aho would be the perfect 1B to a 1A forward. And if we can land a true 1A forward, this first line will see the best hockey Sebastian Aho has ever played. And whoever that forward is with him on that first line is going to benefit as well with Sebastian Aho as his center. Seth Jarvis, obviously one of my favorite players on this team, and he's still really young. If you watch post-game interviews or just interviews with him in general, pressers, people talk to him like he's a veteran player because he plays such a great brand of hockey, and he's just going to continue to improve, and I'm excited. He's going to be a top 6 guy for this team for sure for years to come. We got him locked down for a while too, which is huge. Now looking at the second line, so we'll start with Taylor Hall. A great get over there with the Mikko Rantanen trade, obviously. I do like him on this team. I do like the 3-year extension they gave him, but he isn't a top 6 guy. Once we make some upgrades to this roster, he will fit perfectly in this bottom 6. He's got a lot of talent. He can make some plays. He is a player who I thought struggled in this Florida series, but a lot of players struggled in this series. I just didn't think he could get his game going in this series, and he fanned on a lot of shots and didn't his some of the looks he had to get nets in the back of or pucks in the back of the net just didn't go his way. But I'm still excited to have him on the Canes for years to come. He's a super talented player at the end of his career who gives it his all. Jesper Kotkaniemi, the team needs to figure something out with him. I haven't been high on him for the last 2 or 3 years, considering he gets paid almost $5 million AAV. He did bring some physicality to this team this year, which I appreciate to make up for some of that lack of scoring. And he did have a lot of big assists near the end of the regular season. But either Jesper Kotkaniemi needs to be bought out or traded, or he needs to be demoted to a fourth as our fourth line center, and we need to make it a priority to bring in a true second line center who can contribute to this team. I'm gonna get into that a little bit later in this video, but that's just my quick rant on Jesper Kotkaniemi. Logan Stankoven as a rookie, I know he played in last year's playoffs for Dallas too, but he was the Canes arguably their best player in this playoff or in this series. And on the offense, he was definitely the best player for the Canes in the series. There's immense potential here for Logan Stankoven. He fits in perfectly. He fits this Canes style of hockey perfectly, and he's going to be a big factor on this team for years to come. Jordan Martinook played, I mean, this playoffs was phenomenal. He's one of those guys who brings that physicality to this team, which we are lacking throughout this roster. The Canes have been called out on it by our opposition, by Biz and the TNT intermission post games and all that stuff. And Jordan Martinook is one of the players who brings that physicality. Jordan Staal, still solid. Later in his career, obviously doesn't move the same way he used to, but still playing some solid hockey and bringing that physicality and that big body. William Carrier has been really solid this year, especially for that $2 million AAV contract we have him locked down for. In Game 5, he made a true difference out there, and he also brings in some of that physicality that this Canes team needs more of. This fourth line, Eric Robinson had some big moments, scored a goal or two in this postseason. As a fourth liner, he did his job. Mark Jankowski, someone they got in at the trade deadline, who I didn't know much about, but has played really well for this Canes team. And when we needed a bigger physical guy to come in against a team like Florida, he's fit in really well. He had that crazy streak in the regular season where you're scoring a lot of goals too. So I like him as a depth guy for sure. And then Jackson Blake, another rookie who really impressed this year. Wasn't the greatest in the Florida series, but I just think Florida did a really good job of neutralizing a lot of the players on the Canes, and Jackson Blake was a victim of some of that Florida-style hockey. But still a really young rookie, and he should get better and develop for years to come. And then a couple of guys I wanted to touch on. Tyson Jost didn't play in the postseason, but he got some minutes in, so just wanted to throw him on here. He got some minutes in the regular season. Jack Roslovic, he played a lot for the Canes in the regular season. Had a pretty solid year. In the playoffs, not really. He didn't do much. Martin Jankowski was more impactful in the back half of the playoffs than Jack Roslovic, but he was obviously a key contributor to this team in the regular season. Jesper Fast, haven't seen him play hockey for the Canes in like 2 years because of injury. He's a free agent this upcoming year, but just wanted to throw him in there because he was a contributor to this bottom six just 2 or 3 years ago. Next, the defense. Jacob Slavin. Jacob Slavin is arguably, and maybe not even arguably, but is the best player on this Hurricanes team on a nightly basis. The best, in my eyes, the best pure defenseman in this league, and I think a lot of people agree ever since Four Nations and these playoffs. But he's been doing this for 8 years, and Jacob Slavin just had his moments, is so steady, and he showed, I think, a lot of people more of his offensive side as a defenseman in the series, scoring some goals, some big, he had the big overtime winner against the Caps and some goals here and there. Brent Burns, Brent Burns was a little shaky this year. I think the age was showing on the last year of his contract here in Carolina, but honestly, in these playoffs, he played really good hockey. He did have some moments of slipping up, but so did this entire defense group, except even Jacob Slavin had a few just rare moments of slipping up. But Brent Burns really showed up in Game 4, and he showed up at times in this this Canes playoff run where it really mattered. So really respectful last year for Brett Burns. If it is his last year in Carolina, he didn't go out in a way to be disappointed about. He went out playing some solid Brett Burns hockey. Dmitry Orlov, just like Brett Burns, near the end of his career, he also had some bad moments this year, but he also had some good moments in these playoffs and throughout the year. Another player that this could have been his last game tonight in a Canes jersey, so we'll see what happens there. Jalen Chatfield, I am so happy and so grateful the Canes were able to lock him down last offseason for the contract they got him for. I thought he was so going to get another 1 or 2 million a year on another team, but Tulski, or the GM of the Carolina Hurricanes, did his thing and locked Jalen Chatfield down. And Jalen Chatfield missing in this Florida series ended up being a way, way, way bigger loss than I would have ever expected it to be. And that's because of a player we'll get to here in a second. And then we'll go to Shane Gostisbehere. He had a really solid playoffs. He ended up being one of those guys that the Canes landed in the offseason that actually made a pretty big difference to this team. This whole defensive pairing with Shane Gostisbehere and Sean Walker were huge. They both Sean Walker missed some time in his Florida series too, but both these guys were really solid defensemen for the Canes, and I am really happy with seeing these two as a defense pairing going into next year. Definitely a really solid third pairing there. And then now we'll touch on two rookies who came in these playoffs. So first, I want to talk about Scott Morrow. So when Chatfield got out, Scott Morrow came in, and I think Scott Morrow will be a good player for the Canes one day, but my goodness, in this Florida series, he was the worst player on the ice by a mile on both sides in Florida and Carolina. In that first game, Scott Morrow was, you could argue, directly responsible for 3 goals Florida scored. In game three, in game three, Scott Morrow was also, you could argue, directly responsible for 2 goals they scored in that third period. So I think Scott Morrow really struggled. Once Sean Walker went out with injury, along with Jalen Chatfield, Rod Brind'Amour didn't really have, he didn't have the freedom not to play Scott Morrow. He was kind of required to play Scott Morrow. So, it is what it is. I do have some doubts if he is ready for the start of next year, but we'll see what happens there. I'm going to get into that a little bit later, like I was talking about earlier. And then Alexander Nikishin. Alexander Nikishin, by the end of these playoffs, looked like a legit NHL defenseman. I see the potential. I am really excited for him to play next year. I have no doubt in my mind he will be starting on this roster for the team next year when September rolls around. I think his offensive play will get polished up as next season rolls along, and he already looked really solid defensively, and you saw the physicality, and you saw the power on the slap shot and things like that. I think Nikishin's going to be a really, really fun player for the Canes team next year and for years to come. And I'm really, really grateful we've got him back here from Russia. And then speaking on the goalies real quick, so Freddie was amazing until the Panthers series, and then the wheels kind of fell apart. But Game 4, he did bounce back, and that shutout looked really solid. Game 5, I just don't, those goals weren't his fault. Like, they were just really good setup plays by Florida, a lot of tip-ins, and Florida just they just got some good goals, and Freddie can't do much else there. Pyotr Kochetkov looked solid when he came in. He looked really good in that game 3. Gave the Carolina Hurricanes a chance until that third period, but then he did let some pucks in he should have saved, and it was just a horrible period for the Canes there. Kochetkov's still really raw in my opinion as a goalie, and he still makes a lot of questionable decisions. It's just the way he plays goal, and it's going to take some time to continue to develop him, but I do like him still on the squad, of course. Just I don't think he's ready to be a starting goalie to make a deep playoff run. So that's just a quick synopsis on this team, but I want to really look forward. The point of me making this video is to look forward to next year's Carolina Hurricanes team. Because the truth is, guys, that the Hurricanes, again, like I said earlier, have overachieved this year, and they're entering a really pivotal offseason where their entire young core is locked down for at least 2 years. And there's guys like Seth Jarvis and Sebastian Aho locked down for 3-4 years plus. And you got a lot of young guys, and the Canes have the fifth most cap space in the league this offseason. And let me tell you, the four teams ahead of them with more cap space are the Chicago Blackhawks, San Jose Sharks, Columbus Blue Jackets, and I'm blanking on the fourth one. It's late, guys. I'm sorry, but I'm blanking on the fourth team right now. But I know it's not a playoff team. It's a team that was at the bottom of the league this year. Man, I can't believe I'm blanking on them. But either way, it's not a playoff team, and the Canes have the fifth most cap space, being in the Eastern Conference Finals. That speaks volumes to how bright the future of this team is. With this roster, they were in the Eastern Conference Finals, played two solid games against the Florida Panthers, who might go and win the Stanley Cup again this year. And they're entering this offseason with all this cap space and two additional first round picks to all their draft capital that they picked up in that Mikko Rantanen trade, in which they got Logan Stankoven. So they will be competing with teams with more cap space than them, but those four teams are all not in win now mode, to be honest. And the Canes do have the leverage of being a team with a winning culture that could maybe lure in some of these higher end free agents to make money and come play for a winning team. So when we look at this upcoming offseason, this is what the team will look like on the first day of the offseason, barring any cuts, any buyouts, any trades up to then. So they would lose some free agents. We'll look at the free agents first. Jesper Fast, I don't think he resigns in Carolina. Obviously, because we haven't seen him play in 2 years, and we don't even know if he'd fit on this team anymore. So I think he's a goner for sure. Jack Roslovic, I do think Jack Roslovic's gonna get a pretty solid contract somewhere else, maybe like a 3-4 million AAV for like 4 or 5 years. But I don't think the Carolina Hurricanes are going to pay him that, because I do believe there's a clear upgrade that can be made there. But Jack Roslovic could be a solid top nine center slash winger for a younger rebuilding team. Eric Robinson, I mean, like I said, had his moments throughout the year, but on the fourth line there, I don't think they re-sign him. I think they use that money elsewhere to make some upgrades. Tyson Jost, again, another guy who didn't get a lot of minutes, didn't play in the playoffs, so I don't think this team finds him that valuable to pay him a solid contract, so I think he's gone. So two guys who've been staples to this team for years, Brent Burns and Dmitry Orlov. So Brent Burns, I'm sorry we couldn't win a Stanley Cup with you on the Canes. That is one thing I really wanted the Canes to do in these last 2 years, was win Brent Burns a Stanley Cup. 40-year-old guy who still plays on a nightly basis and plays overall pretty solid hockey. And I ultimately do think he retires this offseason, or we see him go somewhere else. I don't think the Carolina Hurricanes give him another contract. I think they're going to look to go younger, bring some of their younger guys into this defense, or sign some other new younger guys and bring in some new blood. Dmitry Orlov, another guy who I think still has some hockey left in him in the NHL for another 2 or 3 years, but not with the Carolina Hurricanes, honestly. I could see him going back to Russia too to play in the KHL, so we'll see what happens there. Guys, I need water. I'm sorry. Oh man. Okay. So those are all these guys are unrestricted free agents. The Canes don't have any notable restricted free agents. So now we look at the offensive group, and I put, so in the parentheses here you see how much money each of these guys are going to be making this upcoming season, and then we look at what holes need to be filled. So we got with so I have Mark Jankowski up here at the fourth center position, because that is where he played in his Florida series. But I do think we can make some upgrades here. But one position that's completely open is one forward position on the left, with Eric Robinson being off the fourth line. And then on the defense, obviously there's a hole left by Brent Burns and Dmitry Orlov. So let's talk about the defense first. So I think a lot of Canes fans expected a defensive pairing of Alexander Nikishin and Scott Morrow to come in next year and just be ready to go. Like I said, I do think Nikishin's ready. I don't know if Scott Morrow's ready. he might need to play some more games in the AHL and be called up later on. But Rod Brind'Amour and his coaching staff showed a lot of faith in him by playing him even in game two over Alexander Nikishin after that horrible game one he had. So maybe the Canes do think he's ready, and after a whole offseason under his belt, maybe they think he is ready to play in the regular season leading up to next year's if they make the postseason and whatever happens. But the thing is, I mean, I think we would have really loved to see Jacob Slavin and Alexander Nikishin play on the top line together because with Jacob Slavin being mostly a defensive defenseman, you want to pair him with a defenseman who's more offensive minded, like Brent Burns was. But the issue is that Jacob Slavin's a lefty, and so is Alexander Nikishin. So I don't think that lefty lefty combination is going to work for both of them to play their best hockey. And I know Jacob Slavin, if when he's not going to be playing on the second or third defensive pairing because he is our best player, and that just wouldn't make any sense. So I am pretty confident we'll see Alexander Nikishin paired here in the second defensive pairing with potentially Jalen Chatfield. But that means if we don't bring in someone, Scott Morrow will be on the first pairing, which is not going to happen. So then we look at free agency. So we're going to pivot to free agency here. I'm going to kind of lay out, this isn't going to be a full Canes offseason video, but like what the Canes need to do from a high level view to be a Stanley Cup team next year. And when we're looking at the defense, there's two guys who could play on that right side with Slave, and that potentially makes sense. One's Aaron Ekblad. So there's some Panthers free agents who I would love the Hurricanes to snag because the Panthers don't seem to have the cap space this offseason to land some of these guys when there's a team like the Canes who can throw in them some like a 2-3 more million AAV a year than the Panthers can. And when you get guys from a team like I mentioned earlier who already plays our brand of hockey and you're pulling them from this championship team, you're narrowing that gap between the Canes and the Panthers by just this much. But just that much could be enough to snag another game or two in a series against a team like the Panthers and ultimately win the East. So Aaron Ekblad would make so much sense paired with Jacob Slavin, considering he is an offensive defenseman who is 29 years old and brings some youth to that defense that the Canes desperately need. And considering he was suspended for a couple games this year, I'm most likely not because they're playing so well, but we could get him for a little bit of a discount considering he was suspended for like PED use or whatever it was for 20 games. So wouldn't be a cheap option, but that is an option. And another player is Dante Fabro on the Blue Jackets. He had a breakout season, and I am a little hesitant to give money to a guy who only had one good season, and the other seasons have been kind of like mid. But the Canes do tend to bring the best out of players when they do come to Carolina, and in our system, I could see him producing more and building off last year. But for the sake of this video, since I did say that the coaching staff showed a lot of faith in Scott Morrow, we will have just Jalen Chatfield moving up here to the first line with Jacob Slavin and Scott Morrow moving over here to the second defense pairing. And then obviously you can mess around with this throughout the year. If Scott Morrow develops, move him to the first defense pairing and move Jalen Chatfield back down here. But either way, if this is the defensive group the Canes move forward with going into next season, they need to sign some viable depth pieces. So come something like playoff time or come guys get injured during the year, you need people who can come in and not be basically bots like Scott Morrow was in these playoffs. So now this is where the Canes need to really spend their money. There are 3 forwards in this upcoming free agency class that are all unrestricted free agents. And if the Canes don't land at least one of these guys, I say at least one because they have the money to land 2 and still have money left over to make moves. Those guys are Mitch Marner, Maple Leafs, Nikola Ehlers from the Winnipeg Jets, and Brock Besser from the Vancouver Canucks. All these guys can make a difference to the Canes' top 6 and make us a better team. Mitch Marner is obviously the big kahuna, the big fish on this market. He will demand the most money, and he will eat basically half of the Canes' projected cap space going into this offseason. But there's not a lot of superstar forwards in this league that will fit into the Carolina Hurricanes like Mitch Marner. We saw this with Mikko Rantanen. A lot of these guys that are big time forwards who can go and get goals aren't committed to playing on both sides of the ice. And Mitch Marner is a player, a solid two-way player who will give max effort on the offense and the defense. So for that reason, I do think Mitch Marner is a perfect fit for the Hurricanes. I know there's some doubts when it comes to the playoffs, but to be honest, I think a lot of that has to do with him playing in Toronto, somewhere with a lot of high pressure and somewhere he doesn't really seem to want to be. And in the Four Nations tournament, he did show up. He was one of Canada's best players, in my opinion. So, I mean, the potential is there. And with a player like Sebastian Aho in the top line and this just well ran Carolina Hurricanes organization with lower pressure, I think Mitch Marner would fit in really well. So, for the sake of this video, I will have the Canes, having Mitch Marner slotted in for the Canes here. And for now, let me just move on your Svechnikov over here. So Mitch Marner moves in here on the, or sorry, not under Svechnikov. Seth Jarvis will move him off here for a second because Mitch Marner does play on the right wing. And we'll have him taken up about, we'll say 13 AAV. And that leaves the Canes with 15.4. And I do know the Canes will be in on Mitch Marner because when the Mikko Rantanen trade talks were going down, they had a trade in place with the Leafs involving Mitch Marner and Mikko Rantanen. And I think it was either the Leafs or Mitch Marner saying they don't want that trade to go down at that moment. I think it was Mitch Marner. But for that reason, it's obvious the Canes also think Mitch Marner fits into their system and they will be targeting him this offseason. And there's only a couple of teams that can afford to pay him this. I mean, I think the Blackhawks are viable with pairing him with Bedard. They need to make some big moves. Pittsburgh to get him closer to home. But Mitch Marner can come to a team who's already proven they can win and get paid. So that's one thing. And then, like I said, I do think the Canes need to land another one of these guys. And I would love to see them land Nikola Ehlers. And we'll move Taylor Hall out of here. And Nikola Ehlers would fit into the Canes' top 6 perfectly here on the second line. And I think he's going to command a 7 to 8 million AAV contract. But for the sake of this video, the Canes want to make sure they get him. So I'll have them giving up 8.5 AAV here. And that brings them down to about 7 AV, we'll just say 7. So already this top 6 looks better. So you may ask where Taylor Hall and Seth Jarvis will fit. So Taylor Hall would go right here on the 4th line. And we'll come back to Seth Jarvis here in a sec. And then another guy, so Jesperi Kotkaniemi, again, like I said, either needs to be traded or bought out or something needs to be figured out here. But let's say for the sake of this video, he is traded or bought out, okay? Because 4.8 is a lot of money for a guy who I think is a 4th line center, okay? And let's say they have to retain some of the salary and they just get up to 10, okay? And that removes him at the lineup. And none of these centers, Stahl is perfect on the 3rd line. Jankowski is not a 2nd line center. I would love the Canes to unload the rest of this cap space and grab Sam Bennett. Again, this is another player that plays for the Panthers who kind of closes that gap. And I think teams are going to offer him money between 9 and 11 AAV to get him to leave the Panthers. And Sam Bennett brings in that physicality that the Canes so desperately need. He solves all the Canes' issues there on the 2nd line, just not having a solid 2nd line center who can score, who can make a difference on every shift. And Sam Bennett does exactly that. So that leaves, this is the lineup. And obviously Seth Jarvis is at the lineup right now. He won't be. And William Carrier played some phenomenal hockey here in the playoffs. He brought in the physicality. But a team, so the Panthers are a team with a lot of depth and guys who are all ready to play playoff hockey and just be there when needed. So are the Oilers right now, with like guys like Jeff Skinner that aren't playing every night. So when guys do get hurt, like Hyman, they have guys who can fill in. I think William Carey could be a guy like that for the Canes. At only 2 mil AV a year, um, guys are going to get hurt throughout the year. Guys are not going to be playing well, so you're going to need a guy like William Carey to come in, and that puts Seth Jarvis here on the. We'll put him on the second. We'll put Logan Stanko in on the third line because he did show some. He had some success here on the third line during the regular season, and that to me, as an offensive group right here, is really promising. This top six is already so much better. Like this second line could honestly be the first line on a lot of like rebuilding teams that are not good. This first line is so solid, and I think this top six. When I look at this top six, I can start to be delusional and think Stanley Cup and not feel super delusional about it. And looking at this fourth line, I mean, obviously there can be an upgrade here for Mark Jankowski at the fourth line center position, which can be addressed either through free agency or bringing up guys. But Taylor Hall in the fourth line, that's a lot of talent right there out of a veteran guy. Jackson Blake, we saw a lot of promise out of him this year and could continue to develop. This third line's been super rock solid, and you added some youth to that third line. Again, super solid right here. So the Canes they're going to have to use this cap space and consider, like I said, they have the winning formula. They have a lot of cap space. They have some draft capital they can use to trade. They need to build a team that when they run into a team like Florida or the Rangers with Igor firing all cylinders in the playoffs, they don't crumble. They need a team that gets the job done, has no excuses. And when I look at the Canes, when I look at this potential roster of the Canes, I can see a team based on watching these players play that can go and win the East and hopefully win a Stanley Cup for his organization. So obviously, these are my thoughts just after the game and after the series wrapping up. As the playoffs come to an end and the regular season starts heating, or the offseason starts heating up, I'll do a more in-depth video on what the Canes should do if you guys would like, and what any other team should do. I have some ideas already. But yeah, another season coming to an end for the Canes. No more Canes hockey till September. Definitely a little sad about that, but it was a good year. Had its moments, and can't complain about an ECF run. And I'm really excited for the future. And if you're a Canes fan watching this, you should be too. I know in the moment the emotions can get the best of us, but there's a lot of promise with this team. And last year it felt like a championship window closed when we lost a lot of guys we loved in free agency. But watching the Canes play in these playoffs, I think a new championship window is open. That's going to be open for another 4 to 5 years at least. So I'm super excited. And thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys later.